So I am in the planetary science sort of like department, which is sort of like a subset of the physics department. And I'm going to be talking about my research, which is basically surface science, but what we do is we sort of like simulate the processes in the interstellar medium primarily. Just so we can advance the slide. So I'm actually from England, and I actually got my degree in chemistry. I have done things in astrobiology and physics and planetary science. So I've been here since 2016. One of the notable things I would say is I'm one of the deputy PIs for the Center for Lunar and Asteroid Surface Science. This is a $7.5 million virtual center, and it was virtual before COVID. And so this is like an opportunity to collaborate with a lot of different researchers, and we do things that do involve, like engineering. For example, some of the co-Is are actually doing things such as sending CubeSats into space, etc. And so most of the courses I've taught are like, intermediate physics and astronomy classes. I have developed two graduate level classes. One is on astrobiology, and the other is a sort of like physical processes, which is more sort of like spectroscopy related things. So my main research, as I've sort of mentioned, it may sound a little bit out there, and we're trying to do is simulate the interaction of radiation with matter in space, basically. So a lot of this requires building ultra-high vacuum chambers. And so in general, what we do, I've outlined a few different techniques that some of you may be familiar with here. So chemical vapor deposition is something that some of you might use, and we use that to prepare thin layers of ices. We use various different techniques to monitor how thick our ices are. We then will irradiate them with either electrons or UV photons. We primarily use infrared spectroscopy, but sometimes also Raman spectroscopy to analyze our ices while they're being irradiated. And then we heat them up in a process called temperature programmed desorption. And that is very similar to gravimetric analysis as well, thermal gravimetric analysis. And we use a mass spectrometer to sort of like analyze all the species that we see there. And so we also do some construction and design of like instrumentation as well, which I'll get a little bit more into. So like I mentioned, it's the Center for Lunar and Asteroid Surface Science. So we actually do a lot of research involving meteorites. So for those of you that don't know, the meteorites are basically time capsules of how the early solar system was. And interestingly enough, some of them contains up to parts per thousand levels of amino acids. So this is, when amino acids chain together, they make all the proteins in your body. So it's very interesting as to like, what is the role of meteorites and the origin of life, for example. So we have a lot of these meteorite samples. And what I would say is if anyone does have any amazing new techniques that we can try to understand these better with, we'd be very interested in basically just like giving you some meteorites and seeing what you can tell us about them. So we're also interested in the effects of space weather on these bodies. And so if you've ever looked at the moon, actually, I'll come back to that in a second. But basically, these airless bodies are going to be altered by the radiation that's hitting those surfaces. And so we are building a chamber to basically look at these processes directly. And so as I mentioned, we do some instrumentation. I'm applying through a number of different NASA programs to basically propose instrumentation that would actually fly on spacecraft in the near future. And so this is something that we're interested in. And if anyone is interested in those sort of things as well, we can basically talk and help you through that process. So as part of class, I'm also interested in various things that help with like making space travel easier, the formation of an extraction of lunar water from various different environments, such as, for example, on the moon, as well as in situ resource utilization. So getting water out of anywhere, for example, is something NASA is very interested in right now. And so we're trying to make some big collaborative efforts towards like sort of like trying to get these funding going. So my teaching, as far as like CCS is concerned, a lot of my students do like a lot of like kinetic modeling. We use a lot of like computer-aided design, LabVIEW, COMSOL, etc. And so if there's any of those classes, I'd be very interested to hear about those. And I am planning in the long term to try to like teach a class developing spacecraft instrumentation. And so I'm going to play this video up here, which is like, this is from our lab here. And this is an example of the surface science ultra-high vacuum chamber that we have. And what we're trying to do here is essentially simulate the conditions of space. So the first thing you want to do is get a really good vacuum. And so what we do is we wrap it in tinfoil and bake it to try and get rid of all the water in there. We have a big turbomolecular pump, which is basically a big fan that removes all of the molecules. We have a second one there, and that gets us down to a pressure of about 10 to the minus 10 torr. We actually get down to about 10 to the minus 11 torr, and so that gives us about 10 hours or so before a single monolayer of contaminants hits the surface. We have a cryostat here, which is cooling our sample down, which is just pictured in the center here, to about 10 Kelvin or so. And that just happens to be the temperature of these interstellar clouds in space. And what we do is we then condense a bunch of gases on it. I won't go into, I'll leave the video playing, but I'll just talk about the other things as well. So we condense gases on the surface that are representative of what is observed in the interstellar medium. And we then sort of like irradiate it with either electrons or UV photons. And so during my PhD work, we actually spent a lot of time demonstrating that if you're using ionizing radiation, you are generating electrons, and those are really what's doing all of the damage. People beforehand were relying on synchrotrons to try to like generate very high energy protons, etc. And we basically said, nope, you can do the same thing with just a much cheaper electron gun. And so the spectra down here is an infrared spectra, and you can see all these absorptions from different key molecules. So we'll put those in, and then we'll irradiate them, and then we'll see how they evolve. Can you form things like amino acids, etc. And we do also do some quantum mechanics, some ab initio and DFT calculations, because we are in a very unusual chemical environment here, where we are providing radiation, which is a very high energy source, to molecules that are surrounded by basically a matrix at 10 Kelvin, which is able to stabilize molecules that would not be stable at other temperatures. So we are essentially able to look at things that like not many other people can do. You can't, for example, go to an organic chemistry lab and build the molecules we see in our setups. And so we are proposing to get a gated Raman instrument for this. And so for those of you who have worked with Raman spectroscopy, it is plagued by fluorescence. If you have a gated system, you can actually separate it from the Raman signal from the fluorescence signal. So I'll leave that there. But we'd also have, I guess, in that chamber, I should just point out a mass spectrometer right here, which is a very capable mass spectrometer that can do positive and negative ion mode. Some of the other things that we can do in the lab is look at not only the changes in the ice itself, but what things are spotted off those surfaces. And I'm going to come back to the electrons again. So essentially, if you look at the icy moons around Jupiter and Saturn, they have magnetospheres, which move a lot of charged particles very, very fast into those surfaces. And these includes electrons that are hundreds of thousands of keV in energy. And people will ignore the electrons because at those energies, they don't really do very much. But part of what we've shown is that if you focus on the lower energy electrons, and we can sort of see here but like at 200 and 500 EV, the yields you get of ions and neutrals is actually much, much higher. And so we've done some work on that. I'm going to move through these fairly quickly because I want to get to the end. And so we have a second chamber that we are putting together, which is essentially so that we can focus on looking at powders. So at the Center of Lunar Asteroid Surface Science, they build a lot of simulants and do a lot of work on asteroids. And so we're trying to make sure that we can put powders in here. And it's basically designed so that we can, the visible and the infrared are set up exactly like they would be for observations. So you have basically a one-to-one comparison of what we're looking at in the chamber compared to the observations. And we can basically put whatever we want in here due to the way that this is set up. And again, we have like a radiation sources and a mass spectrometer to be able to see what's coming off when we heat it up. And so I'll move on to the next bit. And so some of the other things that we're doing is trying to basically look at like whatever techniques that we can to understand how these amino acids form within meteorites and what else they might potentially make. So we use a lot of techniques, whatever we can, basically to throw at this. We've looked at Raman here. So Raman can be used to tell you roughly what temperature the meteorite was exposed to. And so you can see here the part in the middle seems to be a slightly higher temperature than the remaining areas. But what's important is that temperature range. So once you get to above about 100 Kelvin, you tend to remove water, and that's when you start polymerizing things. So you can actually make from amino acids actually things like proteins and peptides. And so we're trying to like figure out where are those on these meteorites. And in the bottom right is an example of a transmission electron microscope image of a meteorite. It's color-coded. The magnesium is green, iron is red, sulfur is yellow, silicon is blue, calcium is cyan-colored, and then the gray is carbon. So there's a big lump of carbon in the middle there, but we don't know where the amino acids are. And so we're trying to use a lot of these sort of like new techniques that are emerging, such as nano-IR and nano-Raman, to see if we can get a bit more information on that. But like I said, if there's any more information that you might have tools, we'd be very interested in collaborating with you to learn more about these meteorites. We also do some very primitive experiments to try to figure out, if you have some of the precursors and you put them together in a autoclave with a mineral surface, heat it up, and then basically see what chemicals you form over time. Okay, so as far as sort of like collaborations and like near-term plans, I said like there's a lot of instrumentation that we're sort of like trying to develop, and one of the instruments that I want to develop is this tool called a 3D IR Raman spectrometer, and this is basically anti-Stokes Raman spectroscopy, but you use an infrared tunable laser to sort of like pump different specific vibrational states. And this allows you to actually like get very unambiguous details about the molecules that are involved, as well as the environment around them. We also are interested in protecting pharmaceuticals from radiation, which has applications to the health of astronauts. As I said, like the gated Raman spectrometer. So we do a lot of instrument development. We're actually also building a time-of-flight mass spectrometer that has its own unique design. And so as far as collaborations go, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities essentially for, if anyone's interested in building CubeSats or rovers or any kind of robotics or instrumentations, there's a lot of funding opportunities available through NASA, and you'll hear some of those in the talk after me. But if you're interested in like any new way we could get water or any other chemicals out of different environments, that would be very useful as well. And as far as my lab is concerned, yeah, we have a very capable visible near-IR FTIR spectrometer, as well as various other polishers, tube furnaces, pellet makers, etc. And we do have a little Raman spectrometer that we're putting together right now. Yeah, and then long term, basically what it says, we are looking to submit a Tech Foundation proposal to obtain a combined nano-IR/nano-Raman system. So if that is of interest to you, please do let me know. And we are also looking to put together an astrobiology consortium. So that's, if you have any interest in astrobiology research, again, I'd love to hear from you. Teaching, yeah, like I said, anything that involves MATLAB, SimIron, SolidWorks, LabVIEW, or COMSOL are things that we could potentially, I'd have students that would be interested in taking those classes. Okay, and then just quickly for the acknowledgements, these are my current graduate students on the left, and my undergraduate student, Riley, was just selected for a Barry Goldwater Scholarship. And then here's the acknowledgements. So I have got some funding from the Florida Space Grants Consortium, which I'm very appreciative of. And then class and NASA, basically. And so with that, I'll take any questions.